affects metrics, but some people drop in that way. So I want to make sure that we address those audiences as well.
Sure. What's your typical audience size, and how familiar are they with what's going on across the Linux Foundation and OpenChain?
Okay, so the audience size varies wildly. The primary size in terms of the watchers of each webinar, in terms of live plus recorded, tends to be 60 or more participants, but an awful lot of the participants are split across the continents. So in Asia, we often have a handful of people dial in. A lot of people do the recording so they can change speed and so on and come back. Europe right now is asleep, so we're not getting any of our European stakeholders in. And we're going to be probably having a random amount of American participants. But yeah, most of the people that tend to be on OpenChain webinars are very aware of supply chain management and only have a tangential understanding of a lot of the broader LF stuff. So,
Excellent.
people might be familiar with the fact that To-Do Group is out there. They might be a part of To-Do Group, but they might not necessarily have much awareness of the other stuff we're doing in LF. And that's where this portal is vitally important. I mean, we're looking at a lot of people in jurisdictions such as in China that are addressing supply chain management. They're hearing a lot about things like the fact that we have the ability to run programs of some sort or other to manage open source. But when it comes to looking at, for instance, the LF portfolio, it's very confusing. There's so many projects. Where do I start?
Yeah.
So this portal is the first time that most parties, I think, in the OpenChain ecosystem have had a chance to consolidate. And therefore, you can regard the primary audience as people who are managing open source day to day. Risk containment on licensing was the key thing on their desk for many years, but they're being asked to deal with a broader portfolio. How do you manage the business processes in open source? And they're hunting for solutions. And one of the biggest challenges we have is that right now, the solutions appear to be many and disparate. All around the internet, there's many projects saying they can help, not just LF portfolio, but elsewhere. And tying the threads together, knowing what level you're at is very difficult. So for instance, in OpenChain, we often talk about being at the very high level. We often talk about how we set basic context for process management of open source. And license compliance is one part of that. Another part of that is related to how you do security assurance, for example. But then we're not constrained to that. We're focused on trust in the supply chain. And it just so happens that we covered a few topics first. And then we say that other projects, like you look at SPDX, you're beginning to look at a solution for software bill of materials. You look at To-Do Group, you're beginning to look at a solution for if I'm building a team, if I'm building an OSPO, what's this that I'm doing? You look at a project like Chaos, it's about metrics. And now, thankfully, you're taking all that load off us. We can point them at you. But it's the first time, I think, that we've ever seen the consolidation of these stories in the industry. And that's a fascinating change for everyone. And it's truly been missing until this point. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin handing over, just one second. We've got some viewers live on YouTube, and we have some pings out to our teams, and it's definitely time for us to get rolling regardless. I'm going to be doing the formal intro, taking us forward, and then what'll happen is As soon as we've done the webinar and it's finished processing, I'll be taking the recording and promoting this across all our channels. OpenChain will be leaning heavily into the portal, I think, as our description of how to do this from now on. Yep, okay. Let me do our intro. So my
Sure.
slides should be sharing, I think, hopefully.
I can see it.
Perfect. All right, I see Victor's online here on LFX soon. Hey, Victor, good to have you on board. Okay, let's do the boilerplate to formally get rolling. All right, so I'm going to run the intro now, and we're going to head off. This is an OpenChain webinar. Today, we're going to focus on the LF management and best practices portal. This is something built by our good friends at LF Research, and it is a way to land on a single page and onboard to all the various LF projects covering the topics related to open source governance, open source metrics, open source business. This is how you run open source. It's something that we've had a lot of requests for in the past. People look at the various projects out there and say, how do they fit together? And it's something that helps with discoverability. So people might be aware of one or two projects, but not aware of the sheer scope of what's being done inside Linux Foundation to help you at all levels, from the very highest to the most practical of implementation. Now, before we get started and hand over to Hillary, who runs, of course, LF Research and does all of the work, we are going to look at the antitrust policy notice. The Linux Foundation shows the antitrust policy at the beginning of every meeting and webinar. You can read the full antitrust policy on our website, and if you're from a member company, you can talk to our counsel, Andy Updegrove. That is designed to make sure we all have a nice, safe, standard context for interacting and collaborating. And it's now done. We move into the meat of the webinar where we can have a lot of fun. Just to briefly introduce Hillary as we kick off, LF Research has been active for a couple of years now, I believe, and producing a ridiculous amount of material covering all aspects of how open source works, how it provides value, and, well, everything. The volume of material that Hillary and her team has produced is phenomenal. The best way to get a handle on that is just to check out LF Research on the LF pages. But in short, we've changed from having some idea of some details of open source to having an endless stream of reports and metrics, which seems almost impossible to have done, yet here we are. They do it. The LF Management and Best Practices portal is, of course, a small part of the flurry of activity in the last few months from LF Research. And projects like OpenChain have been fortunate enough to be invited to lend a small hand to that itself. OpenChain is going to be promoting this portal a lot. This is going to be our standard way to describe people how to get started with LF projects. So you're going to see it integrated in our website. You're going to see it integrated in our social media work. You're going to see it everywhere as we try to explain that if you're doing open source, if you're anywhere in the supply chain, if you're one of the 10,000 companies we're touching, Go here, get knowledge. But what does it all mean? There's, there's only one person to describe it. Hillary is going to explain what it is, why it matters, and perhaps where it's going next. Hillary, over to you.
Shane, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to have this opportunity to describe some of the new efforts that we have put into place at the Linux Foundation to add value to our community. And we're really pleased about the opportunity that we have created through the Management and Best Practices portal. I am delighted to represent Linux Foundation and LF Research. And just a little bit about myself. 3 years ago, in fact, 3 years ago this month, Linux Foundation Research was born. We were created to provide insight into the open source opportunities, challenges, and insights and trends, as well as data that would add value to all of our communities and to make decision-making easier, to make strategy rooted in data. And so in addition to the research projects, we have created information hubs to help find relevant research more easily, relevant training and events more easily. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll dig into the specifics around the formation of LF management and best practices, its origins and what it is all about, and how the community can leverage this opportunity of essentially an information hub. So what we want to do, what I hope to do today, is not only introduce Linux Foundation Management and Best Practices portal, but describe how it stewards best practices through the very important activity of discovery. Information is so prolific, but getting the right information at the right time can be a big challenge. And so that's what we want to help. That's the problem that we're trying to solve for through this effort. So anybody who may be new to the Linux Foundation, this slide is for you. We are a global nonprofit organization, and we sustain open source technology projects spanning a collaboration spectrum for open source software, open hardware, open standards, open data, as well as open content. And the value that we provide to sustain innovation is providing structures and frameworks and governance models that facilitate global innovation. We began more than 20 years ago hosting what is now the most consequential open source project in the world, which is the Linux kernel project. And we've grown from that singular effort to hosting more than 1,000 open source projects. And that is exciting, but it can also be overwhelming. And what we want to do is make sure that everybody has the best opportunity to discover these projects and how specific projects can play a role in driving innovation for all stakeholders, be they from the public sector and government, the private sector and enterprise, civil society, and for individual innovators and contributors, and provide everybody a gateway to help solve pressing global challenges. So that's very broadly what we're all about. And if you look at how we as an organization have tried to describe the work that we are doing, the projects that we are sustaining, we have tended to categorize them in terms of industry verticals or technology domains. And this slide is an effort to bring together some of the most consequential projects that we host. At the top, you'll see industry vertical projects in the networking space, in the automotive space, financial services through Finos, motion pictures through the Academy Software Foundation, the energy sector through LF Energy, and the agricultural sector through the AgStack Foundation. But that is merely one way to describe some of the work that we are doing and to categorize where our open source projects fall. More broadly, we have projects that are specific to different technology domains, as well as cross-industry and cross-technology projects, specifically those that relate to best practices or relate to cybersecurity or relate to issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, or maybe even legal or climate or the idea of digital trust. And so bringing together the different projects and trying to find a way to align common goals is really quite challenging. But it's something that we're tackling head on. So you can see very broadly, this single slide is a mere representation of, it's just a small slice of the 1,000 projects under our umbrella. And that's not quite useful enough. This slide actually doesn't live on a readily discoverable website. You have to do a little bit of digging to find it. So we thought we need to do better. We need to provide greater opportunities to describe which project communities, which functional divisions of Linux Foundation are advancing different elements of the open source opportunity. And so why is discovery so important? Well, in a nutshell, it comes down to 2 points. Finding critical information, relevant information faster, it leads to more resilience. It helps advance open source implementation. It allows for faster decision making. And secondly, open source simply thrives when our best practices are understood and well understood. And so what we want to facilitate is a gateway to discovering the different project communities at the Linux Foundation that advance management and best practices and the stewardship of open source, compliant open source, and so on. This effort was also backed by research. In 2023, we published a report entitled Enabling Global Collaboration: How Open Source Leaders Are Confronting the Challenges of Fragmentation. And what we find is that we have communities that are siloed along industry verticals or within technology domains. There's a lot of duplication there, and that overlap is wasteful. And there was a need that has been expressed by the community at large, but also by the board of directors of Linux Foundation to better align projects that have common goals. And here you can see in one of the high-level findings of this research report that ecosystem leaders want foundations broadly, not just the Linux Foundation, but greater cross-foundation collaboration to do more to align open source projects that have similar objectives. And what we're seeing is collaboration around policy on things like the Cyber Resilience Act, or defining what OpenAI really means. So this is an imperative, and it's incumbent upon us to deliver on this need. And so here we have management and best practices. And so what is this? Well, in December of last year, Linux Foundation launched a portal, for lack of a better word, a hub, a digital home that provides access to the decentralized, and to use a word of OpenChain's sister projects that enhance in the discovery of open source best practices, including in the following areas: license compliance, open source software security, training and reference materials, community resources and community events, open data and research that helps drive best practices in open source, information on industry-specific regulatory compliance. For example, that which drives a lot of the decision-making in financial services. And so Linux Foundation Research on our homepage has created the home of LF management and best practices, which you can discover by scanning the QR code or just going to linuxfoundation.org, our homepage. You can scroll down and you'll see where the Management and Best Practices Hub lives. And so here we are. This is the digital home where people can go to discover the multitude of Linux Foundation projects and resources that accelerate open source strategy, management, and best practices all in one place. Additionally, here on LF Management and Best Practices, we could find high-level guidance on current and very important issues, two of which I highlight here. Guidance on using generative AI for software development. This is important, it's timely, it should be featured here. Similarly, information on how to report a security vulnerability. Right here at the highest level on the site, you'll find guidance on how to report vulnerabilities for LF projects and foundations. So here we are. What are the project communities that we have identified as being critically relevant to improving the management of open source and accelerating best practices? At a very high level, these are they: the Chaos Project, the To-Do Group, Open Source Security Foundation, SPDX, OpenChain, who's our host today, the LFX portal, Linux Foundation events, Linux Foundation research, LF training and certification, and highlighting the work of one of our industry-specific project communities, the FinTech Open Source Foundation, which focuses on financial services, and why that project community has some very specific management and best practices requirements, and how people in that industry can find the resources that they need quickly. So I'll take you on a quick introduction of what each of these communities do and why they have been included in the Management and Best Practices portal. Shane, I might take a pause there in case anybody has any questions, in case you would like to pause me and make any remarks, or if I can just carry on.
Sure. I'd like to throw in a question, which I think will be interesting to our audience, especially our audience in Europe who'll be catching this on the recording. So one thing that's come up a lot in the European sphere has been, in general, how the Commission is working with business on things like the European Interoperability Act, in things like the CRA, and so on and so forth. Now, in general, the discussion is cross-vertical. So people talk about it holistically, but there are significant industry verticals in Europe, such as automotive. And here you mentioned that some verticals, like let's say fintech, are being mentioned in the management and best practices. So I guess a question that will be relevant to our European stakeholders will be, is there the potential for other industry verticals to be included? Is this simply because FinOS has been covering a lot of relevant topics that can also be cross-vertical? What's the kind of delineation there?
That's an excellent question. And it speaks to your earlier question about where will this go? Where are we going in management and best practices? Our goal is that this is not a static, one-time site. This home will evolve with the regulatory and policy evolution, so that our project communities who are responsive to industry-specific policies or regulatory changes can use LF management and best practices to provide timely guidance on and information on how we steward compliance with policy like the CRA. This type of response, as it emerges, will find its home here. So I also welcome the community's feedback to say, hey, we'd really like to include this initiative within our project, this working group within our project. And I'm here to spread the word, not just to folks on this webinar, but even within colleagues at Linux Foundation to say, if you have relevant resources that are published in response to an emerging policy in one jurisdiction or another, please keep us apprised. Let's include that resource here, or a new training or certification to get folks skilled up on how to comply on X, Y, or Z. I hope that answers your question.
It does indeed. And I noticed we have some of our Japanese community participants diving in and out of the call. And that reminded me of something that has been, relevant, particularly in Japan, I think increasingly relevant in places like China. We see, for instance, active OSPOs in the Japanese community. We see people who are very active in the OpenChain community. And there's sometimes some overlap in terms of the material being discussed. So one question that came up in the Japanese context, I think it's beginning to appear in China, is the question of what do we do with project overlap? And Hillary, I think this is kind of a loaded question because we've kind of discussed this before. And one of the key things with project overlap is make sure the projects talk with each other and communicate and stuff. But my leading question is therefore, this portal appears to be something that can help point people at projects, but it also appears to be something that can help projects be more aware of each other. And does this perhaps also speak to your comment about talking inside the LF ecosystem and helping people get informed? Is this potentially a portal where we can collaborate with each other and try to bounce off each other's projects and make sure that rather than overlap, we end up sending our energy to X project who's solving Y problem and vice versa?
Absolutely, Shane. That is my hope, that this portal not only accelerates discovery of management and best practices resources supported by the Linux Foundation, but enhances collaboration across the LF projects and the project leaders. It is astonishing how few of our colleagues really understand the resources that exist that have been created in the past 3 years that are specific to research alone, and how much data we have that can help their communities advance their objectives. There's just simply a lack of awareness because we are decentralized, we are global, we operate across time zones, and getting the message out, as much as we have newsletters and meetings, it's still a struggle, even internally, to convey different opportunities, the different resources. And so this is like LF Research, the research portal, the research library. Management and best practices is nascent. It needs to be championed like any other research project or a new project launch that we do.
Thank you, Hillary. I think that's really useful, and it's something that gives us a momentum, a reason to invest more and more in this, to think that this is the beginning point of improving the total package of what's out there and cross-project collaboration. A lot of the time we've been sort of, as you said, kind of little islands and ad hoc where, let's say To-Do Group and OpenChain start working on XYZ, but the cross-project awareness of all of the totality of this has been hard to get. There's so much going on, so many releases. It's very hard to keep track of all of it.
Absolutely. So with that, Shane, I'll take the group through at a very quick highlight the different projects that we have included today. And this is not the finite list by any means, because as our organization evolves, we'll expect that LF management and best practices continues to grow and represent new innovations and new sets of resources. But principally, where we are today is that this portal includes the Chaos Group, Community Health Analytics for Open Source Software. This community project creates metrics measuring open source community health, metrics models, and it creates software to better understand the global scale of an open source project's health profile. They're doing terrific work. We've collaborated with OpenChain on research projects. One of the latest conversations I had with this community was around understanding which diversity, equity, and inclusion practices adopted by some projects were successful so that they could be replicated in other project communities too. So their work is very, very important, and we're delighted to include them here. The To-Do group, I've collaborated with the To-Do group from the get-go. Essentially, this community is a project hosted by the LF that nurtures open source practitioners to support successful open source program offices and similar initiatives within organizations to accelerate knowledge sharing, to accelerate best practices, and to create greater awareness of the tools that are available for organizations to think strategically about not just open source use, but open source compliance and ultimately open source contribution and community stewardship, and why that's so important and what the value is that can be derived for organizations. And so this is a Linux Foundation member benefit that organizations can join the To-Do group and collaborate in this capacity. And what's very exciting is that we were talking earlier about highly regulated industries. And one of the challenges for the financial services sector is that banks, many banks, have internal policies that outright prohibit open source code contributions, even to projects that are strategically relevant to that bank. And so that's frustrating in many ways. However, there are many ways to contribute to open source, and code contribution is but one of them. What we have seen through the To-Do group, as well as through LF research, is that people who are very excited about the open source opportunity can participate in To-Do group working groups, in Linux Foundation research projects, in the documentation creation process, and not be in violation of their company's internal contribution policies. So these communities are important as mechanisms for engagement and ultimately help move organizations along in their thinking about open source policy. We hope that policies will become more flexible, and the To-Do group is here to help. The Open Source Security Foundation recently became a funded effort, has existed long before to make it easier to securely and sustainably develop, maintain, and consume open source software. They provide projects for collaboration, best practices, things like Scorecard and SigStore, and are here to really accelerate cybersecurity awareness, but also proactive practices so that maintainers, projects can get the resources that they need, can get the information that they need so that their projects are as secure as they can possibly be. SPDX, our software bill of materials project community, SPDX is an open standard. It is an ISO standard for SBOMs, and there's a new release coming up, 3.0, to be announced hopefully next week, to communicate release information, the name of a project, the version, components, licenses, copyrights, and other useful security references. As many of you will know, the Biden administration issued an executive order that all government procurement of software must be an accompaniment of a software bill of materials. So we're seeing the acceleration of the adoption of SBOMs, and SPDX is the format that we sustain at the Linux Foundation and encourage adoption and use. So please do check out SPDX. Of course, OpenChain provides process management standards, reference material, and a focused community of international partners to build a trusted software supply chain, and the home of ISO standards, ISO, IEC standards 5230 and 18974, the home of open source license compliance programs and open source security assurance programs. LFX, this is a terrific resource to understand the infrastructure around the Linux Foundation projects that we sustain, providing contextual information about the maintainers, the velocity of contributions, who the leading contributors are to projects, and to help us provide the right resources so that these contributors can be supported in an optimized way. So this platform provides a suite of insights and tools that help drive secure open source development, provide a window into how effective we're doing at engaging our communities in ensuring that the software that we sustain is compliant and offers scorecards and is compliant in all the security ways possible. Sorry, I just skipped ahead. Do create an LFX or an LFID so that you can explore the insights that are available through LFX and get a window into how different projects are faring in terms of their ability to be maintained, up to date, and to encourage more folks to get involved. And LF Research, you've heard a little bit about. We publish empirical insights into open source trends and readiness across industries and within technology domains. And of course, we look at issues that are cross-industry and cross-technology. And it's very important that we include as much reference material on management and best practices as a value-added resource to our community. LF events, Linux Foundation convenes incredibly important community events, bringing people together to have in-person discussions, to build bridges, to create networks, to solve problems quickly, and awareness of the events that we are running that are specific to improved license compliance, open source management best practices, the acceleration of the open source program office is all very, very important. And recently in December, we launched a new track called Operations Management Summit that would deliberately focus on management best practices to be as inclusive as possible to people across the globe who are very, very interested in this subject matter and are looking for a place to convene. So we hope that folks can discover what is coming down the event pipeline and plan their schedules accordingly. In terms of training and certification, we offer an enormous resource of training material so that organizations can skill up, they can attract talent, that they are offering their employees opportunities to be proficient in open source license compliance basics, in management and best practices as a broad discipline, in developing secure software, and so on. The extent of courseware is both free and paid is immense, and we encourage people to find the training that they need personally or that their organization needs through management and best practices and the training and certification portal. And to conclude, FINOS, our FinTech and Open Source Foundation, is again our financial services project community that, because of the regulatory environment, has had to be extremely disciplined in offering frameworks for the community to be regulatory compliant. They've created a body of knowledge, a massive resource for financial services organizations who may be new to open source, and they need to know how to be successful in their use of open source software, and how they can increase their contributions accordingly. There's specific training, and it's one of our leading project communities that is by necessity had to provide resources as a value proposition to ensure not just the proliferation of the open source projects that FINOS hosts, but to encourage more people to get involved. So next, I will take the opportunity to just shine a spotlight on the specific research projects that I'm intimately familiar with, that I encourage people to view, which are unto themselves a kind of a guide and a deep dive on open source best practices in different ways. To date, LF Research has published more than 50 unique projects describing the open source opportunities, challenges, trends, and so on. And I would say approximately 1/3 of those are specific to management and best practices. So it is a theme that is very, very important to LF Research because it's important to the community. And so some of our resources I'll just highlight here. For 3 years, and next year we'll be launching our 4th study on the state of the open source program office, and open source software initiatives that organizations need to be aware of, and why the OSPO as a structure can accelerate compliant open source use, a contribution, and set organizations up for success, so that they can think strategically, where OSPOs are not just a cost center, but become a profit center. So some examples here of the data that our research has created refer to compliance support, OSPO barriers, community support, and why OSPOs are successful. So very quickly, half of organizations with a structured OSPO or an open source software initiative have processes to address license compliance. So that's an important trend. It's one that we want to see increase over time. Organizations think that their funding for OSPOs is likely to decrease, nearly doubling from 12% of respondents to 23% in 2023. Funding is important, and it needs to be part of the management and best practices conversation. And so organizations who plan for financial resourcing, not just making use of internal resources that are currently paid for, it's very important. How organizations collaborate with other open source software organizations is really important, and that's why OSPOs exist. That's their number one responsibility is stewarding community support. And here is a great stat that 96% of organizations report that their OSPO or open source software initiative has driven significant improvements in software development best practices. So that's a happy stat. That's one of the trends that we're really excited about. And this is precisely the data that we hope will inspire organizations to become involved in establishing a management and best practices community within their organization. A report published in the first quarter of 2024 is on open source license compliance. Very specific research. What are the requirements? What are the challenges ahead? And really, this report, which we were delighted to have contributions from Ericsson, Jimmy Alberg from Ericsson wrote the report forward. Essentially reads like an ode to software composition analysis vendors and the importance of using tooling to scan for licenses. How do we advance open source license compliance? How do we integrate compliance into development processes? And how can organizations reduce the risk? What is the process for license compliance? And how do we manage license compliance effectively? What are the important tools, not just SCA tools, but the use of software bill of materials, static application security testing tools, and so on. So if you're interested in open source license compliance, you'll discover information about projects like OpenChain, SPDX, and the importance of using SCA vendor tools to ensure open source license compliance. Another report we published earlier this year is on maintainer perspectives on how do we create more secure open source software, and what maintainers think ought to happen, what tools they need to ensure software security. Almost 3/4, 69% of contributors want defined best practices for secure software development. They want security tools to be more intelligent, as the use of tooling is the #1 approach that is used to improve security across the supply chain. What else do we need to do? We need to reduce developer fatigue, and we need to give developers the tools that will give them more time so that they can, that automation is critically important. Without that, they cannot respond in a timely fashion to pull requests. They cannot respond as effectively to maintenance and doing code inspection for vulnerabilities. And again, the #1 approach to evaluating the security of open source software packages is through the use of tooling. So it's important that organizations think about tooling, think about providing adequate resources to their full-time employees. We have another great resource, a guide to enterprise open source. What are the things that the private sector needs to consider? What are the open source opportunities? Why should they participate in open source communities? Identifying that just by getting involved, you can build on the work of others. You don't have to go it alone. And that participation in open source projects allows you to leverage that external R&D and to create opportunities to commercialize your innovation, increase faster time to market, and lowering the total cost of ownership of your development. And how do you accelerate strategy? What is the pathway for an organization to identify the objectives, the strategy, the opportunity at every stage of software development? And how can organizations prepare for reliance on open source software. What are the organizations that maybe they could join to provide resources? Well, one example came up, the To-Do Group is one such resource. So those are three deep dives from different perspectives. One's the enterprise, one at the maintainer level, and so on, about specific management best practices that are rooted in data. I want to spotlight events very briefly. We do have a new event stream. It's Operations and Management Summit. And next week, we have a track at Open Source Summit in Seattle that has a terrific agenda that is essentially a deep dive, bringing the community together to have in-person discussions and to share insight into accelerating management best practices in various ways. So have a look at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit North America events page, check out Operations Management Summit, and follow along and participate, submit a track for a future call for proposals. I also want to touch on the fact that LF management best practices is not the only initiative that we have launched recently. There are related initiatives, and we're creating these because they're important. This is all part of the discovery that we are undertaking. And the two related initiatives are specific to sustainability. How do we connect the many open source projects and communities across the Linux Foundation that advance sustainability in one form or another? And what are the projects across our community that advance digital trust as a thing? So welcome to LF Sustainability, the home for lining up Linux Foundation hosted projects and resources to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Here you'll find projects identified. We have a suite of resources. We've got a landscape put together by LF Energy. We have community events. Anybody interested in learning more about sustainability can come here. One of the community events that we are promoting at LF Sustainability is the OSPOs for Good event in partnership with the United Nations, which is taking place this July. And it relates to management and best practices just as much as it relates to sustainability, because as we all know, the Open Source Program Office is but one of many recommended practices to ensure open source success. And what we're really excited about is to see the proliferation of the OSPO across nation states, within municipal governments and supranational governments and organizations like the United Nations as well. So I think everybody is catching on, and that's a really exciting thing. Digital Trust is another initiative where open source projects and all the decentralized applications are converging. What is the infrastructure that we host at the LF that is supporting the new digital asset ecosystem, digital asset storage, digital asset custody, issuance, digital identity, different classifications of digital assets. Here you can find information about this unique area of LF projects. And again, we have two industry projects, Finos and AgStack, that are leading the implementation of digital trust project communities within their industry verticals. So I think that leads me to the end of my presentation, and I'll very much look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Hillary. As we said at the very beginning of this webinar, one of the key things we have here is a landing page which allows people to set context internally and externally to LF. But as you outlined in the various discussions, there's a whole lot more going on here. Anyone on the live audience who wants to raise a question can do so by unmuting yourself or just putting something in the chat. For those of you watching the recording, you have not missed your chance to talk. You can send in a question via any of the OpenChain channels, and I will get it to Hillary, and we will put that response in our mailing lists and so on. Anyway, just checking if someone live here has any questions. And if not, we will say thank you so much, Hillary, for giving us this overview. I think it's the first time we've had a comprehensive overview. And, oh, I see Dave is unmuted. Dave, would you like to say something?
Hey, I just wanted to say thank you for that great overview and that talk. That was really excellent. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dave, and thank you for your contributions. Dave Marr wrote the foreword for one of the research reports that featured in this talk, and thanks a million for tuning in, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks for that mention. Honor.
The secret of community. We all chip in. We all build new things. Alrighty, we're going to be promoting this webinar pretty heavily once I get the recording edited and ready to go. Hillary, thank you for allowing us to get this summary of this portal to allow more people to understand the benefits right there. Please have a beautiful day, and I look forward to the next time we collaborate.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.